I like to think of growth in three main buckets. There is acquisition, your website, then your retention strategies. And so I like to think about it from those three buckets because it's not that they're fully separated, but they are three functions that all are focused on the same goal.
You want to be working with multi-seven-figure brands that aren't huge but have found product market fit. Are there any other kind of criteria for businesses that you kind of work with?
We're anywhere between 5 to 50 million. The brands that we fit best into are the brands where they've had a lot of early success and now they're trying to figure out, how do I build this team to get to the next level?
This week's guest has sat on every side of the e-commerce table, from media buyer to growth lead at Common Thread Collective to lead operator inside nine-figure D2C darling OluKai.
I got into Common Thread Collective, and then there was where, again, I'm a pretty ambitious person, so I was just like, okay, what else can I do? OluKai was actually one of my clients, and I had a little bit of a roundabout way of getting poached and going to work at OluKai.
Sarah now runs BA Commerce, a growth team that embeds inside high-performance D2C brands and scales them to new heights.
I call BA Commerce a consultancy versus an agency because we're very different in the way that we'll step into whatever that means for your specific brand.
So join us in today's episode as we unpack how to get finance, inventory, and marketing actually working together.
If you're missing plan by 10, 20%, that's millions and millions of dollars that you have already bought for the future that the finance and the inventory and the product team now need to figure out what to do about.
The secrets to building a real growth system that balances acquisition, website, and retention.
Understanding those three buckets and how they all lead to your overarching goal, which is going to be your top line revenue and your bottom line contribution.
The dashboard that Sarah uses to make finance and marketing decisions in real time, and what separates operators who scale from founders who stall.
I call them growth operators, and while yes, they are semi-fractional, so it really feels like they are in it day in and day out with your brand.
Plus, she'll give away the actual BFCM strategy that her brands are using and how you can implement it today and start winning.
If you don't have impact over the actual strategy, the execution, you can only do so much. It's really hard to sell a shoe that doesn't sell, to say it simply. I knew that there was a lot I didn't know. I didn't appreciate how much, because there was so much.
So if you've ever felt like you're scaling chaos instead of growth, this episode will show you how to build a brand that runs like a machine and doesn't burn you out in the process. Let's dive in. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the videos, why not consider subscribing? We drop bi-weekly content that will help you improve your business right here on the channel. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Jordan.
I want to kick straight off. I know we were just talking about this before. So you are currently kind of traveling the world and building a business, right? How is that process?
It is fun. I think there's a part of living abroad at least from the States, that has given me confidence in a way that I don't think I had while living in the States. I don't know not saying that that is the case for everyone or forever, but there was something about, being so far away that I don't speak the language. Nobody knows who I am. Like, I walk out my door and nobody gives a crap about what I do. And it's kind of a wonderful feeling. And so to me, I think it helped me find a lot of confidence. But yeah, it's also extremely challenging. I mean, I haven't lived in the same apartment or Airbnb for more than 3 months. I think 4 months might have been the longest I did. So I'm kind of constantly moving and constantly, just readjusting, and that part is exhausting because there's an element of, you want your sacred space, you want your desk with the same thing every day. We had a moment when we moved to Oaxaca where our apartment was out of electricity and water for 2 days, and so I was working at a cafe and I was taking a call at a cafe, and this guy turned to me and was like, "Excuse me, I am writing and your call is bothering me," and I'm like, so there are definitely times for things like that, but I think I know that this is temporary and it's an adventure that I probably will never have again. So I'm just enjoying the adventure for now.
On the business side then, you work with e-commerce businesses. I would describe that as, fractional growth, but how would you describe what you're doing with them?
Yeah, I think that is a good simplified way to describe what we do. I think the longer version of that is that a lot of growing businesses, especially in the, you know, mid to high seven figures to 8 figures, again, mid to high, are looking for growth expertise or looking for that kind of head of growth position. And it's a really hard position to fill. And it's a really hard position to find the right person for. And at the same time, what I discovered is that there's a lot of people out there who could fill that head of growth role, but they haven't been a head of growth before. And so nobody wants to hire them because they haven't had that direct experience, but they can't get that direct experience without actually working in it. And so it becomes this kind of chicken or egg situation as well as a supply and demand issue. And then there are people like myself or others who have done the head of growth role or similar type roles, and we get to a point where we don't really want to do it for other people, and we are wanting to build our own thing, or or we want to do fractional head of growth. And what I found with fractional head of growth, just purely that, for just myself, is that I didn't feel like I could provide enough value for the price that I wanted to charge. Like I can develop a really amazing strategy, but it falls apart at the execution. And if we can't get people who are in the day to day and able to execute, like, don't get me wrong, I'm working late and I'm doing, the things that I can do, but I'm only one person. And and so the model that I developed is one in which you get the strategy of a fractional head of growth, but you also get actual bodies and people to do the work and to be there day in and day out with your brand operating as your, you can call it a fractional head of growth or a fractional, I call them growth operators, because, and while yes, they are semi-fractional, our growth operators only work across a max of 2 clients. So it really feels like they are in it day in and day out with your brand. I call BA Commerce a consultancy versus an agency, because the agency model is very much, hey, here's our scope of work, here's what we touch, and here's what we don't touch. We're very different in the way that our scope of work is basically grow your D2C brand. And so we'll step into whatever that means for your specific brand. Normally, that obviously has a relation to media and web and retention. But for certain brands, there might be flexing up on TikTok shops. For certain brands, there might be flexing up on affiliates. And so we really kind of mold to whatever it is that particular brand needs. And yes, so short answer, yes, fractional head of growth. Long answer, we're kind of a full teammate in the process of growth.
Okay, so it's kind of fractional on the strategy side with you kind of leading that, and then there's the kind of full service execution of whatever the business needs. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And what's your backstory? Like, how did you get started in the ecom space? And yeah, what did that journey look like?
Yeah. So my backstory is a little bit funky. I have a degree in dance from the University of Iowa. I went to school for, from a very young age, I wanted to be a professional dancer. I saw river dance and I was like, I want to do that. I never did Irish dancing, but I still wanted to, be on a stage and do that. And I was really competitive. And so I got into professional dancing, and I say I was a professional dancer and a professional waitress, because you don't make a whole lot of money dancing, and it's you're going from one gig to the next, and I kind of got to a point where I was done just living. I was living in a apartment that was basically like an efficiency studio. I didn't have a kitchen. I didn't have a like I was doing my dishes in the bathtub because I was basically cooking off of a hot plate, and then I didn't have like a real sink, so I was doing them in the bathtub. And I was just kind of sick of being broke and wanted more. And I got into fitness and started doing personal training. And when I was doing that, it was a really cool way for me to use my physical knowledge to help people. And it was, I really enjoyed that. And as I was doing that, I started having to like market for myself so I could get clients. So I started getting into social media a little bit. And then I started to discover ads, worked at a couple small gyms and would help them out with some ads. And I was like, okay, this is really cool because this is a interesting use of the right and left side of my brain. As a dancer, I was obviously very, very artistic, But looking back later on, I mean, in school, I was an A+ student. I loved math. I really excelled at that. But I just, I was very kind of one minded that I wanted to be a dancer. So it was really neat when I kind of came full circle and I was like, okay, there's this interesting thing in advertising where there's a mix of your right and left side of your brain where you're using data, but there's an art and science to it. And so from there, I eventually realized that I could get a job doing social media for companies. So I started as an intern making $12 an hour writing copy for a cleaning company because that was the most that I could get because I didn't have a degree. I didn't have any like real experience. So I took whatever I could get. And that was about 10 years ago. So it really wasn't that long ago. And I just worked my way up from there. I eventually got a job working at an agency running ads for Boeing. And it was a good step in the door, but I knew I wanted to get into direct to consumer, like running ads for Boeing. Honestly, it was boring. I was like, oh, we've had this many impressions and this many whatever. It wasn't, anything real exciting. So I was able to transition into a more D2C company, started running Facebook ads for e-commerce companies, spending like $1 million a month. And then I started managing media buyers. Eventually, I got into Common Thread Collective, and there I started as I basically myself and another gentleman managed the media buying team there. And this was actually when iOS 14 hit, so I was part of the team that kind of rolled out our response to iOS 14. And then there was where again I'm a pretty ambitious person, so I was just like, okay, what else can I do? Meta is only a part of the puzzle here. So and luckily I was at Common Thread and they had overall growth strategy, and I was like, I want to do that. Like, how do I get into it? And so I just like I kept asking and kept kind of putting myself out there, and eventually got into overall growth strategy where I could see both not just Meta but Google and retention and web and kind of the whole gamut of it. And it was there that I had OluKai was actually one of my clients, and I had a little bit of a roundabout way of getting poached and going to work at OluKai, which Common Thread wasn't super happy about, but it ended up being really good for me personally because I got experience that I never could have gotten just at Common Thread. And so at OluKai, I was able to manage a 9-figure P&L, and that's where I took on web reporting, inventory management, retention and loyalty programs, as well as media, not just from the Meta and Google side, but we were running TV, influencers, affiliates, out of home, direct mail, like you name it, we touched it. And I mean, that was an 8-figure media budget. And so there was a ton of experience that I got there, and it was really wonderful, and I'm really grateful for that. But I kind of realized, I like being able to work for myself. I want to be able to travel. I also think I like working with smaller companies. I think it fits my personality and my skill set a little bit more. I know that that's probably weird. Most people are like, I want to work for the biggest company and whatever it is. But I kind of realized that it's more fun with smaller companies. There's less red tape, and there's so much opportunity, and I don't know, I like that, and so that's what I'm doing now.
Very cool. Okay. I want to pick up on the transition because it sounds like you kind of started off as a media buyer, then you started managing media
Hmm.
buyers, and then you kind of went full stack. Can you talk to each of those
Hmm.
kind of initial steps of, firstly going from a media buyer to managing media buyers? What was that like? And then going kind of beyond Meta?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I think Meta is a great place to start for anyone because even even though you are just touching Meta, you start to quickly understand that you start to understand conversion rate and you start to understand AOV and the impacts that that has to the ROAS that you're seeing on Meta. So you start to understand the bigger picture pretty quickly. And so when I was media buying myself, I think the things that I learned were being able to take bigger goals or challenges and then break them down into more actionable pieces and more actionable data points that we needed to kind of get there. So it's really hard when you get a client or a brand and they're like, hey, you need to double spend and keep your ROAS the same because then you're just like, where do I go? And so I've had so many nights where I'd stay up really late trying to figure things out, and you'd be going to like, oh, well, I need to run this ad, or I need to do this land, or I need to do this, whatever it is. And so I eventually kind of got to a place where I was like, okay, I know how to take these overarching goals and then just like really simplify it and say, okay, this is the number one opportunity at that brand. So like this particular, I don't know, let's call it like brand A, like they have, they've got great ads, they've got great clicks, they've got great, engagement or whatnot. They're just not getting the conversion at the AOV that they need. So then I'm like, okay, I'm going to hyper focus on that. And so that kind of skill set, I think, helped me. And and people were able to see that, like my managers and whatnot were able to see that I could do that. And so then they would ask me to go ahead and coach others. And that's kind of how I started to train other media buyers to like be able to think through it the same way of like, hey, again, because there's just so much you can look at. So really just kind of simplifying it down. I think also from working as a fitness coach, I got a lot of training in how to coach people and how to motivate people and how to, not just because if you're trying to train somebody to, lift heavier weights or work out or eat healthier and they don't inherently want to do it, like you have to understand their why and you have to get to know them. And you have to build a relationship so that it starts to become their decision and they start to feel really good about that. And so I think that there were some skill sets that I took from there to coaching and training media buyers. And I think on top of that, like creating a community of media buyers, like I think that from my own personal journey, like I felt very alone through a lot of it because like I don't know anybody else who has a degree in dance and then came and did this. Like I just did it, and but then realizing that there are so many other media buyers who feel alone, and they're like, oh my god, am I the only one who's up all night thinking about my ROAS? And so being able to create a community and be like, no, guys, we all think about that. We all feel that way. Like it's okay. There's some camaraderie here and whatnot. So I really enjoyed that. And then I think then transitioning into overall growth, again, I'm very grateful for Common Thread because they had a lot of open door policies in terms of being able to learn from other clients and other departments. So it wasn't, like, hey, you're only in this department. You can't jump on this meeting. You can't learn about this. You can't look at that account. Like it was much more if you wanted to learn, the opportunity was there. So, I mean, Taylor used to do a Friday call where he would like kind of jump into different accounts and teach people things. And he had like a growth guide training, which I couldn't get in at first because like they had a policy of you had to work there for so long before you could get in. But what I did is I asked them, I was like, hey, what's your reading list? And so they gave me their reading list and I bought every single book and I read every single one. So like it was just nice to be able to find places where I was like, okay, if there's any opportunity for me to learn from others, even if I'm not doing the job, like how can I do that? And so I think that helped me to just start to get information that I couldn't elsewhere. And then eventually, when I was given the opportunity to manage overall growth, uh, it was a lot of trial and error, and it was a lot of like you're kind of thrown in and you got to figure it out. But luckily, I again being at Common Thread, I had people that I could lean on and ask questions, and be like, how would you approach this? How would you do this? But at the same time, a lot of it was just I had to lean on my logic and be able to use that same skill set that I had from media buying of like, hey, when you're just looking at media and you have a problem, like there's a bazillion things you can look at. When you're looking at holistic e-commerce and you're trying to grow a whole company and a whole business, there's about a bazillion more things you can look at. And so really just trying to break those challenges and opportunities down and using that same process to come up with the main focuses for that brand, I think just really helped me from there.
Okay. I have heard, and kind of going back to what you were saying about the training there, I have heard that Common Thread have a pretty insane kind of onboarding and training program. What was it like for you? And is there any kind of lessons that you can share from that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much it's changed. I was there in 2020 till early 2022. So and I think that I'm sure it's changed a couple times. And I was onboarded as a trainer for media buyers rather than head of growth, or I think they called them growth strategist, excuse me. So my training was a little bit wonky, but I would say, I mean, one, the onboarding there in general, Walker, I believe Walker Williams, he used to oversee this as well as Paniota, was she was a partner there and managed an overall HR department, and they put together a really really great onboarding. I felt like, there was a lot of like, hey, here are things you need to know about us, about our culture, about the things that we do and the things that we don't do. And they really made you feel very, very welcome very quickly. And so I really appreciated that. It was probably one of the only companies I've ever been in where just my first couple of weeks, I was like, oh my God, like this feels like the best place ever. I'm just so excited to be working with these people and so motivated to be doing that because of how well they wanted to treat their employees. And then from a actual training perspective, like I said, they had the growth guide training. I didn't go through that, so I didn't have as much visibility to it. But I would say that, like I said, Taylor used to have these Friday calls where he would he would typically have like some client that, had a challenge or an issue or whatever it was. And he would just dive into it, and it was really great in so many ways because everybody would learn a lot. You also didn't want it to be your client because you would feel pretty scared because he would dig deep. And Taylor's definitely has strong opinions, and he's right most of the time. So he doesn't. There's no kind of bullshit. Like he gets straight to the point with stuff. So I think for me, like those calls were honestly some of the best training that I had because it was just like, oh God, like we're all a lot of times, especially in this industry, I think one of the things that I learned from Taylor is like we try to do, I don't know how to, I'm trying to think of the right way to say this, but sometimes we overcomplicate things a little bit. Like, you're trying to grow X brand, but like, for example, how many times I've run into this, and especially it's common thread, and also at OluKai was, hey, we want to grow this brand, but we also don't want to just be reliant on Meta. We really want to be reliant on these other channels. And it sounds good from a high level perspective. And it sounds like something that, I don't know, maybe makes sense. But then you start to dive into the data of that specific client and you realize that they're spending all of this time and money on something that isn't working when there's something that is working really well that they could just scale. And there are so many times where there was just like a premonition of doing something a certain way because they heard that that's the way that you should do it, or there's some kind of underlying fear for whatever reason. And Taylor was always just really good at like cutting through the bullshit and just being like, this is what the data's saying. Like, if you want to do that because you feel like it, like go for it, but it doesn't make sense. But yeah, so it was a lot of on the job training is what I would say.
You talked a few times now about kind of growth. So, in terms of the position at Common Thread, you were growth strategist, and then, now obviously kind of in the head of growth role for businesses. What levers do you look at, or, under that growth umbrella, what areas can people focus on?
I like to think of growth in three main buckets. So there is acquisition. This is going to be typically your media channels, your affiliates, your influencers. It's also going to be your organic strategy. There is your website and your marketplaces, you could call it. So this is going to be your website. It's also going to be Amazon. It could also be TikTok shops. It could be LTK. This is the place where people make the transaction. There's going to be then your retention strategy. So this is going to be how we keep people in the brand. So this is going to be your email and SMS. It's also loyalty programs. It's also things like unboxing experience or direct mail or things that are really meant to keep the customer coming back. And so I like to think about it from those three buckets. But if you think about it, they're kind of like a Venn diagram where they all overlap because it's not that they're fully separated. They're never going to be fully separated, but they are three functions that all are focused on the same goal. And then kind of underneath that, or maybe even in the middle, is going to be your product and your creative or marketing strategy because that touches all of them and it really drives all of them. And so I like to think about growth using this framework and then understand where the key levers are that I need to pull within each of those. So understanding, okay, for the customers that are coming in, are we acquiring them at a first person purchase profitability or are we acquiring them at a loss? And based on that loss or that profitability, how much are we getting back from them from the retention side of things? Are we making our money back on month 2 or 3? What's our 12-month LTV to CAC ratio, 3 and 6 month LTV to CAC ratio? I also like to look at LTV margin to CAC, so like LTV multiplied by your gross margin. So taking out COGS and understanding that. And then from there on, what's our overall AOV and what are people buying, so that you can start to understand, okay, how does that affect this LTV metrics, and how does that also affect your acquisition metrics? Because there might be certain products or certain offers that have a higher or lower LTV, or have a higher or lower discount, that are leading to a better acquisition, so better CAC or AMER, as well as better LTV. So it was kind of a long-winded answer, but it all comes from, okay, understanding those three buckets and how they all lead to your overarching goal, which is going to be your top line revenue and your bottom line contribution. So it's really taking the goal of the client of how much am I looking to grow top line and how much am I looking to have on that bottom line, and then breaking it down into, okay, from that top line, that's going to be new and repeat. Okay, that's how I'm okay. From a new side of things, I've got my acquisition strategy. How are we getting those new customers? From a retention side of things, okay, what's that LTV? If we've got subscriptions, how's that churn rate? How many subscribers are they staying around for? X, Y, and Z. You start to identify little places where there might be opportunities, and that becomes the targets for your team to focus on. And then, what are all those also costs, from an ad spend perspective, from an OpEx perspective, from shipping and COGS perspective? And are
Yep.
there places within those are there levers within those that we can start to improve? So it's really just breaking down those key metrics, and understanding which ones we have the most power to impact in a positive way, and then aligning the team and resources on executing against that.
From the kind of business perspective, there's obviously a kind of a few different metrics that you mentioned there. How should they think through kind of deciding which one is due the most focus, and then kind
Mhm.
of the overarching goal that's probably sitting on top of that? How should they think through that?
Yeah, you're talking like the business owner.
Correct. Yeah.
It all depends on their particular situation and what metric and what's most important for them at that time. So I think that, for as an example, all businesses want to be profitable, and they ideally want to be profitable on that first purchase. And but there are certain times where businesses need cash, and so they need to figure out a way to liquidate inventory and get the cash in order to buy good inventory. So that then becomes a consideration in your prioritization, because, like, giving a specific example, let's say that you've got an apparel company and they're like, hey, we want to be really profitable on that first purchase. We are looking to launch this new collection, X, Y, and Z, but that new collection is not going to come for a few months. Meanwhile, they're sitting on all of this product that is not selling very well. And so, while yes, I would love to have that future strategy where we've got this really great inventory and we're super profitable on that first purchase, right now we've got this not great inventory that we just need to get through. And so you have to consider that in your prioritization and say, okay, well, like right now we're going to get through this inventory. Like ideally we don't lose money, but we're probably going to break even, and we're going to do additional sales strategies that we wouldn't normally do, X, Y, and Z, because that's in the interest of the overall health of the company for the long term. And so I think that you have to be able to hold two things in your brain at the same time. Like, what is my long-term goal? And then where am I at right now? And what do I have to do right now to get there based on this current scenario and current situation? And you have to consider your team in that too, and the resources that you have, because there are so many times where I will have, and I work primarily with small companies, and so there are about a bazillion things that I know we should or could be doing right now, but they're probably not the most important. Like, I have a client right now who, I think a loyalty program would be awesome for them. I think that and I'm not typically a loyalty program fan for the most part, but for this particular scenario, I'm like, I think loyalty could be a really good strategy for us to lean into. That being said, they really need to acquire more customers right now, and we need to be pushing spend prior to Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and we've got a couple launches coming up, and like the team is all focused on that. And if I were to pull resources away and be like, hey, go create this loyalty program, it's probably not in the best interest of the company right now. It can happen and it will happen, but this particular moment, it doesn't make the most sense. It's kind of like I don't know. I've never worked as a nurse or in the ER or something, but for some reason it reminds me of that, of like you're looking at the body and you're like, okay, where do I stop the bleed, or where do I, fix, like stitch this up, and this other thing can wait, like I'm getting to it. But you have to basically understand, okay, like what's that biggest lever that you need at this particular moment, and where is your team deployed at. And if you really think that that loyalty program is the biggest lever, understanding in that decision making what you're taking away from, or investing in additional resources to make it happen.
How involved do you kind of in your current role get involved with kind of the vision and the high level goals of the business, or is it just kind of executing strategies to achieve the metrics that you've kind of backed into based on being told what the vision and goals are?
I'm very involved in the vision and goals for all of the clients. I think that the way that I think about growth from a kind of process standpoint, and I have a slide that I show all of my clients to visualize this, is it starts with your financial goals and your product. So it does, I believe that the high level goals do start with the client, because they own, what do I want to achieve and what product am I launching? What products am I trying to sell? That being said, we partner in that, right? Like there's so many clients come to me and they're like, hey, do you think we should launch this or this? Can you do some research and we'll talk about X, Y, and Z? But at the end of the day, like that is their decision. They get to decide like what do we want to achieve, and what products are we selling. And so that is where the process starts. From there, it goes to a marketing and growth leaders. And this is where, depending on how big your team is, that could be one person or that could be two people. But that's where we say, okay, hey, we're trying to sell this new lip gloss and we want the lip gloss to be $1 million business. Then it's marketing and growth come together, and they're like, marketing says, okay, here's who we're selling it to. Here's the key messages that we're going to sell. Here's like some partners that we're going to lean into. Here's maybe like, oh, there's National Lip Gloss Day. We can lean into that, whatever it is. Like they come up with like all of those, the visuals, X, Y, and Z. The growth person is like, okay, you want $1 million top line, and you want, I don't know, $20,000 bottom line, or sorry, $200,000 bottom line, or whatever it is within that launch. Like, okay, what are the different costs that are going into that? And how much can I spend on it? How much can I accept from new and repeat? What channels do I want to activate this on? How do we want it to show up on the site, etc.? Marketing and growth basically align on like what that overall plan is from a visual and marketing and a numbers perspective. And then it goes into what I would call like channel execution. So that's going to be your media channels, your web channels, and your retention channels. And so I'm very involved in that marketing and growth side of things, as well as the financial goals. Because at the end of the day, if a client comes to me, and this is one of the things that I do in my due diligence, is if a client comes to me and they're like, hey, I want to grow, 50% next year and my efficiency also grows by 30%. I'm going to look at them and be like, that's probably not going to happen, and unless you do all of these things that I need. And so it does have to be a partnership in that goal setting, because otherwise it's going to be, they're not going to be able to achieve it. They could probably go hire somebody else who's going to say that they're going to achieve it, but they're also not going to achieve it, and they'll waste money doing it. But so I would say, like, one, extremely involved in the goal setting, as well as kind of aligning on what those parameters of growth are. But from the high level, what they want to achieve and what the product is, like that I really kind of lean on the client for.
Okay. And then in terms of the channel execution, just kind of downstream of that, are you just kind of setting the metrics and then handing that off to team members, or what does that process look like?
Yeah, so our growth operators basically operate as that, kind of as like your head of growth. So they're intimately involved in that process where they're kind of like coming up with the plan and coming up with the numbers. Then what they do is they work with the channel owners, and so all of our growth operators can also be like a channel owner in at least one of those sections. So I have some growth operators who are intimately involved in media. Some of them are even media buying on the accounts. I have some growth operators who are very involved with web and overseeing like the website roadmap and whatnot. And I have some growth operators who are very involved with retention. So it kind of depends on the client, and this is where again that consultancy model comes into play. So, depending on the client, our growth operator will flex in one of those and then typically work intimately with the team on the others. So, let's say, for example, again, lip gloss example, we're launching this new lip gloss, whatever. Growth operator will work with me and the client to come up with what that plan is. We call it like a go to market plan. Then they will be working hand in hand with the team to execute. So they'll usually be like hands on executing in one of those channels, whether that be media, retention, or web. And then they'll be hands on working with the team to execute the other ones, making sure that it's, going towards our goal, that it is, executed with high authenticity, etc. So it's a pretty hands-on role. We also have, depending on the client, we also have growth assistants. So on top of the growth operator being hands-on, we'll also have a growth assistant, which is kind of like a growth operator in training, also being very hands-on. So we're really a member of the team, more so than like an agency that like just
Yeah.
handles one side of things. We're really, hey, this is the campaign, this is how we're launching it. Hey, here's what I'm doing, here's what you're doing. Great, let's just get it done.
Might be a silly question. In terms of web, is this kind of looking at things like bundles and CRO to kind of manipulate AOVs and conversion rates? Is that the focus, or is it more kind of brand design and stuff like that?
Yeah, so good. No, it's a really good question. It's more CRO and funnel and offer optimization. So a lot of our clients, we've got a few that are in the supplement realm, and so we have like landers with different like welcome offers and things like that. So it's testing those, testing bundles, testing GWPs, testing upsells, as well as like the overall merchandising and like look and feel. But then we typically will work with designers, so we'll have like the overarching concept, and then we'll work with a designer and copywriter to get that fully executed.
Okay, makes sense. I want to kind of change lanes now and talk about your experience at the nine figure brand. So, first off, what was the kind of reason for that transition? And then, secondly, how was it kind of different to the work that you'd done previously, kind of going in house at the brand?
Yeah, so the reason for it, I think, was that I'd always wanted to work in house at a brand, and it's a lot of brands will hire from agencies, but a lot of brands will only want to hire from other brands. And so it's not always easy to make the jump. You've got to kind of have a good opportunity and know somebody who knows you and wants to give you that opportunity. And so I had always wanted to work at a brand because I wanted to understand more of the intricacies of what goes into running a brand. Because even at even at CTC, where I got to oversee more holistic growth, I'm still only holding part of the puzzle. Like I still don't hold everything. So like right now, what I'm doing, where I'm so intimately involved in that marketing calendar, and then intimately, like working hand in hand with the team on the execution and whatnot, it wasn't the same at Common Thread. Like we would be given basically like we were more of a channel executor than a true kind of like growth partner. At least that was when I was there. And it might be a little bit different now. And so by the time the goals got to me or the campaign launch would get to me, I couldn't have any impact in what that was or what that should look like or even what the goal should be. And I was just kind of like, hey, you just need to execute this really well, which we did. But at the end of the day, like if you don't have impact over like the actual strategy, the execution, you can only do so much. Like I can only sell. It's really hard to sell a shoe that doesn't sell, to say it simply. So on top of that, being able to understand things like operations and more deeply on the finance and cash flow and all of that good stuff, like just being able to like really get experience there was the reason I wanted to make that jump. And then I would say that the difference was that I knew that there was a lot under the hood on the brand side. I knew that there was a lot I didn't know. I didn't appreciate how much, because there was so much. And I laugh now because when I was on the agency side, you meet with your client was always late. You'd ask them the same question that you asked them 3 months ago. They'd be like, I still don't know. I'm still waiting on the answer. You would ask them, like, you would see this thing that they should do, and you're like, gosh damn it, if you could just do this thing, like we all know that would work. And the client still wouldn't do it. And you're just like, guy, are these guys like idiots? Like what is going on? And then a few months being on the brand side, I was like, oh my god, I'm that client. I'm doing that. Like there were just so many times where I was triple booked. My boss would come to me and be like, I got to jump on a call, and I'd be like, I'm supposed to jump on with this agency. Okay, I guess I'm pushing it. I'm so sorry. There would be so many times where like things were out of my control. Like I did not have the decision making power, but I had to jump on with the agency, and the agency was like, why are you not doing this? And I'm like, I know. I don't have. I'm sorry. And so I think there was a lot of like that, which is, I guess, a little bit of politics too. But then on top of that, the amount that you have to think about, like when it comes to operations and especially inventory, I think for OluKai, one of the biggest things that I learned was inventory management. So it's footwear, right? You're ordering 6 to 8 to sometimes 9 months ahead of time. So your forecast and plan is held to a higher standard than like a supplement company where you can do a run every other week. And so and then on top of that, you've got sizes and you've got colors. So you might have a certain style that's working really well from an ad perspective. You're crushing it. You're scaling up spend, blah blah blah. It sells out. You've got to now switch to this other one. It's not that easy when it comes to apparel and when it comes to footwear. Again, you can only display a shoe so many different ways. If they want it, they want it. If they don't, they don't. And so you're constantly like kind of trying to shift budget in different ways based on trying to maximize your profit on each individual style and shoe. So I think that was a huge learning. And I think then the other one was just like how you work with the finance department and how you work with your CFO to be able to be really, really clear on, hey, here's the plan that we're putting out. Here are the key things that we're doing against this plan. And then being really clear in terms of, hey, we're hitting or we're missing, and here's why we're missing. And here are the things that we're doing about it. Because, missing plan where you've already bought inventory 8 months, if you're missing plan by 10, 20%, that's millions and millions of dollars that you have already bought for the future that the finance and the inventory and the product team now need to figure out what to do about. So it really does have a huge ripple effect, and understanding all of those intricacies, I think, was a really great learning experience for me.
I do want to come back to talking about inventory management and the financial side of things, but outside of that, what are the other kind of non-marketing pieces of the pie that when you worked for the brand, you're like, oh my God, this is so crucial?
Non-marketing side. Hmm. I think clear data was another one that was really, really crucial and really important. So when I was at OluKai, I was in charge of the our BI intelligence team, and I helped us to create Tableau reports that were then used. So OluKai, I don't know if you know this, but they own three other brands: Rourke, Melon, and Kanan. And Melon's probably the most well-known one, the hat company. But what I worked with the team to create was these standardized reports that were used across all of the brands. And I think that being able to have really good clarity in terms of what our numbers were and what they meant, especially as you're talking cross functionally, was extremely important. So, for example, demand versus shipped. So, whenever we were talking to our wholesale partners or our finance partners and we were talking about numbers, we'd be really clear if we were talking about demand, which is like Shopify numbers, versus shipped, which would be like our oh my god, what's it called? It's like our fulfillment software, which I'm blanking, ERP. And because the shipped numbers would always be different because they would ship a day or two later. than our demand numbers. So we ran into times where, like, Memorial Day would fall on, a certain period. And so there would be like a couple $100,000 that from an ecom perspective, we would see in month one. And from a finance perspective, we see in month two. And so there were things like that you had to be really clear about, as well as, like media numbers and how media is performing. So running media across not just Meta and TikTok and Google, but adding in TV uh, and direct mail. We had catalogs, we had out of home, we had influencers. Having all of those different spends at a pretty high level, having some really clear reporting on where your money was going and how it was performing was also really, really crucial, to be able to have those kind of cross-functional conversations about where that budget should go.
Working at a nine-figure business, I'm imagining like multiple layers of kind of bureaucracy, and getting a decision made is probably pretty hard. What does that kind of process look like? And yeah, who are the kind of people involved in making some of these pretty important decisions?
Did I mention that I like working at smaller companies better now? Um, it's Yeah, it's definitely a process. I would say that so I reported into the CMO. I also worked very intimately with the VP of marketing, who also reported into the CMO. I also worked very closely with the VP of operations and then our CFO, and as well as our director of product or digital product. So I worked really closely with a lot of other kind of like leads of different departments. And it was really important to get people aware of your current situation and challenge from an ecom perspective, and get people on board to be able to help you. So like what one of the things that was interesting about OluKai is they divided up the different, I guess, distributions in an interesting way. So e-commerce, so I was the director of e-com, so I managed basically Shopify. So all Shopify sales and that P&L. Amazon, which was about half of Shopify sales and was growing pretty significantly to be, I'm not sure where they're at right now, but I would imagine that they might even be close to 50-50. Amazon was managed by a different department, and it was managed by our wholesale department, who also managed our accounts for like Nordstrom and, Tommy Bahamas and other big ones. So it was an interesting split there, because in most companies you would probably see Amazon roll under the e-commerce person because they're so intimately connected. Um, at OluKai, we had them split. And that was definitely a challenge in a lot of ways, because we, there were conversations around, as Amazon was growing, the efficiency on e-com started to decrease. But if you looked at them holistically, they actually were doing better. And so there was a lot of conversations about, like, are these two consumers the same? Are they different? Are they split? And I think for it was really important for me to try to have conversations with multiple, decision makers, or people who would be in the room, to be able to try and educate them on how the consumer typically acts, and how most e-commerce companies look at this, and how it would probably be more beneficial for us to push a holistic strategy forward rather than continuing to split them up. So what I'll say is, like, I'm not very good at politics and I kind of suck at it, which is again why I like working at smaller companies. Because there were some things where I was like, this just seems a little bit more obvious to me, and I feel like we should just move this forward. But it ends up being a little bit of longer conversations, and you've got to get the right people to agree with you.
I don't know if there's an answer for this one, but how do you come up with like a holistic game plan and get like common goals and decisions made that benefit the business, when it seems like sometimes departments are not obviously in conflict, but like they might have conflicting goals, especially in the short term? Like how does that
Mhm.
work in this kind of setting?
Yeah, I think it starts at the top, and I think that you have to have a leader who is bought into that. And I think that if you don't, that it's an uphill battle, and you've got to, accept what you can control and accept what you can't control. So it's yeah, it's a hard one. I don't know if I've found like the quite right answer to it, but I've also gotten to a place in my own career where I love working. I've always wanted to start my own company. I've always wanted to have like my own product. but I've never had the inspiration hit to a point where I'm like, oh my God, yes, this is a thing. And so to me, it's so fulfilling to work with other companies who have great products and have great, stories and whatnot, that I can lend my skill sets to help them grow. Like that is a very fulfilling thing to me. At the same time, I've also accepted that it's not my company. And there are certain things where, if I'm going to, I'm going to put forward always what I think is best for the brand and always what I think makes logical sense. I will always speak to that. But there also comes a point where there are battles that, you fight for a while and then you just say, okay, that is the way that this company wants to do it. And we're going to go with it. And all I'll say is I'm no longer there.
Okay. I'm just picking up on something you said there. So I was wondering why you didn't kind of start your own brand. That's not like you worked at a brand and you were kind of scared off. It's just you're waiting and potentially may do that in the future.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, I would say it's twofold. Is like, one, I haven't had real inspiration hit. Two, I guess it's three things. Two, I'm not really a great product person. I don't think
Mm,
I don't I think I've started to learn like where my skill sets lie,
yep.
and I'm really good at running teams, and I'm really good at running growth for products uh, that are working in the marketplace in some way, shape, or form. Like if you give me a product that doesn't like isn't a good product, no, I can't sell it. But you give me a good product, like I can sell it. And so I have a lot of confidence in that. I have less confidence in my ability to create a product. I
Yep.
don't know. I don't know if that's my skill set. And then three is that I love what I'm doing right now, where I'm able to. I've always wanted to give people jobs. I've always wanted to. It's having this opportunity, and my career path has completely changed my life. Like I said, I was, in that little studio or whatnot. Like now I'm traveling the world and very financially secure. And it's just completely changed my life. And so,
Yep.
and I love what I do. And so, being able to give other people the opportunity to do something similar is the most fulfilling thing to me. And I used to always think that would come from me creating a product and creating a brand. And what I've realized over the last year is like, no, I can train people to do what I do, and they can then go do it and have similar career trajectories and make more money and have more opportunities, and then they can go use it to make their own brand or continue to work for others. And so for me, that's just extremely fulfilling, and I hope to keep doing that for as long as I can.
Very cool. I want to kind of circle back now on 2 points that you raised before. So this is kind of inventory and financial planning and kind of that side of things. Am I
Mhm.
correct in saying, firstly, that the kind of inventory management is downstream of financial planning? I'm not sure if I got that the right way around. So what I mean is the financial plan comes first.
Ooh, that is a great question, Jordan. Okay, so this was a huge debate actually at OluKai, and I would say that. So I'll tell you what we did at OluKai, and I'll tell you what I'm doing at some other companies now. So at OluKai, what we would do is we would have a merchandiser who kind of like would do a merchandising bottoms up plan. So they'd be like, okay, this shoe is going to do this many sales. This shoe is going to do this many sales. This is going to grow this much. This is going to grow this much. So they basically take the trajectory of individual styles or categories and say, okay, here's how much I think each of these are going to grow. Then they would look at new styles coming in and they'd say, okay, this might cannibalize this style. So I'll bring that one down to make room for this one. And they basically make a forecast style by style, which would lead into an overall revenue. So it's a pretty in depth process. I do not envy merchandisers and inventory managers because it is very, very in depth. Then, what I would do on the e commerce side, I would work with a team and we would come up with a forecast that was based on new and repeat. Our main inputs for new would be, our media spend, our efficiency across individual channels, as well as how much we could expect from organic and owned channels. The repeat side would be a version of a cohort model that we would then manipulate based on, things that we knew, like, hey, we had this really big, I don't know, shoe takeoff on this month, so we don't think that's going to happen again. So we kind of manually manipulate it. Or like when the bank collapsed, the SVB blank collapse, like we saw our sales like drop dramatically that month, and so we're like, okay, well that's not going to happen again. So like we manually manipulate it a little bit. So we basically use that. And then I would come together with the merchandiser and they'd be like, okay, hey, we think we're going to do this much revenue. And I'd be like, I think we're going to do this much revenue. And then we would work together to figure out what we thought that was. Then we'd go to the finance department and be like, hey, here's what we came to. And then the finance department would kick it around and tell us to change it, and then we change it. And so we go through that process a few times. So the debate that came up there was, if the finance department just told us what they wanted us to do, it would make that process a little bit easier because we would have like a goal post of which we were shooting for. Maybe we could get there, maybe we couldn't, but it would at least give us like a North Star. However, on their side of things, they were like, we don't want to tell you what you can do. We want you to tell us what you think you can do. Which, like, again, so it was an interesting debate, and I can see both sides of it. What I'm doing now is I do think that it's helpful to have at least a North Star, like, give me something. And so, what I typically tell to my clients is like, just, I literally just like a number top line and a contribution number bottom line. Just give me a rough goal. I can't say that I'm going to get to it 100%, but it at least gives me some guidance. And then what we do is, again, I do that process of like the new and the repeat. And then depending on the client, so we have some clients who are in supplements and we have some clients that are in apparel. We have some clients that are in food and beverage. So then depending on that situation, I'll work with their like supply chain or merchandiser on the individual product forecast, which again will be much simpler for supplements because it's basically like, hey, this is the product. Like it's usually like one hero product and then some other ones. For apparel, it's a lot more complex because it's kind of similar to OluKai, where we've got to do more of like a bottoms up forecast.
So just to confirm this, so now you think the best process is, a few kind of North Star KPIs that are set at, CEO level, founder level, whatever.
Yes.
Then you kind of build your financial model off that as kind of stage two. And then stage three is, the merchandising and the inventory stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say North Star from the founder. Then I would say still merchandiser slash like ecom work hand in hand to be able to come to like what that overall goal is. But yes, I think it's much easier to hit a North Star if you know what the North Star is.
My next question is what happens when the inventory management goes wrong? And how does like as an ecom brand owner, what do you do in that scenario?
You cry a lot. Just kidding. So it's I've seen inventory go wrong a few different ways, probably almost every way you can. Um, so I think again it goes back to like that decision making process and you have to take it a case by case basis. So there is the inventory challenge where you're sitting on too much inventory that's not selling. So that one comes up all the time, right? We bought, this style, we thought it was going to be a blowout style. We're running ads on it for 3 months. We're not seeing it track at what we want it to be. Inventory people come to us and they're like, we need to sell this style. Media team is like, that style is not hitting our ROAS target. So do you want me to push more into it? Because I can, but then we're going to lower the overall efficiency of the brand. So then it comes down to the question to the finance department, like, is it more worth it for you to get rid of the style and break even or make less money on it? Or is it worth it for us to, or do we need to like hold this, our AMER and our contribution at the highest regard? So it really kind of like ends up coming down to a business decision, and so being able to communicate that is the biggest one that you have to do. And then I think that when inventory goes wrong, it's one of those things where you've got to learn, you've got to how do I say this? It's kind of similar to like when e-commerce, like just performance goes bad. So like if you're in a month and you're not hitting your repeat forecast, for example, and your repeat forecast is 20 to 30% below plan, you're probably fucked. Like you can't really do a whole lot about that month. You got to go back and figure out what you're doing in the next 4 months to make up for it. Because unless you want to run a bunch of blowout sales or blast your list, every way till Sunday, like you're not going to make that up. It just isn't going to happen. And so there's a little bit of like you've got to accept what you can't control and understand what did you do in the past that got you to this situation now, and how can you avoid that in the past, or how can you avoid that in the future? So I think for inventory, one of the biggest things that I like to do is have a work with whoever is managing inventory or supply chain and understand, from a simplistic level, what did we buy and how much are we sitting on. So like for apparel, it's the simplest way to do this is have like your key categories. So for footwear, for example, it'd be like, men's sandals, shoes, boots, slippers, and then women's sandals, shoes, boots, slippers. And we would basically have like a very simplified report where I know how much revenue we were expecting from each of those categories in a given month. And then we get that ahead of time. So I could then go to the media team and the creative team and the email team, be like, hey, make sure you've got a lot of content and ads and spend that is around this, this, and this, because that is what we are expecting to sell. And so that definitely helps. But again, it does it a lot of times you come into the conversation of like, hey, this isn't selling at the rate that we thought it was. So we need to make a business decision of if we want to spend more to sell it
Okay.
or if we want to discount it, or if there's some other way that we can offload it.
Okay. It seems to me, as you know, I'm not in the acquisition space, right? But it seems to me like a lot of kind of growth comes under or is downstream of this financial plan and what is going on the forecast side.
Yeah.
I don't feel like many agencies in this space are on the same page with that. Would you kind of agree with that?
What do you mean in terms of on the same page of that?
So like that kind of statement of, you know, finance and kind of marketing on the acquisition side are kind of hand in hand. I don't feel like they understand that or have any clue about this kind of stuff.
No, I don't. I'm not sure either. Like, I think that I think a lot of agencies have a view that is limited
It's
because of just the
siloed,
way
right? They
it's
view
very.
media buying as in a silo.
Yeah, which, and I can't blame that all on the agency either. Like, I do think that there's a lot of brands who don't give agencies the information that they need to do their job well. But yeah, it really needs to be a partnership because that there's no, yeah, when you said, growth is kind of like downstream from that, like I can't tell you the number of times where the media buyer is getting blamed because we can't sell this shoe or whatever. And then the media buyer is like, well, why the fuck did you buy like $1 million worth of the shoe like before you talked to me? And so there really needs to be this partnership. And I think, having worked on like all sides of it, I have a good visibility of that and try to catch it before it gets to that point.
Okay. And what is the kind of bare minimum information required to be shared between, you know, finance and marketing to make like acquisition successful?
I mean, I think there's good amount of information that I think can be shared. So like I run a growth hub, is our kind of I have a basically a giant spreadsheet that I share across all of our agencies, internal and external. And that has all of our information from like, what are we trying to achieve top line? What are we trying to achieve bottom line? What's new? What's repeat? What's AOV? What's Meta's goals? What's Google's goals? What's TikTok's goals. So like all of my media buyers from those individual agencies can go in and see the targets of other platforms as well. So I'm a very like, hey, we got to see this holistically and all understand it together, because I don't think it should be a competition between YouTube and Google. Or sorry, YouTube and Meta, for example. I think that it should be, what is the holistic strategy that drives forward the brand. So I think one thing is just like, I think full transparency in the ways that you can is really important. And then I think from the financial perspective, understanding and then also helping the agencies understand like, what are my unit economics. So like when I get a 1.2 ROAS on Meta, what does that actually translate to in terms of how much I'm making on that first purchase? Because the media buyer might be like, I'm at a 1.2, like that seems profitable, right? But then you break down like, no, we've got all of these, we've got cogs, we've got shipping, we've got, the ad spend that we spent X, Y, and Z, like we're actually losing X amount of dollars on that purchase. So also giving them some education in terms of like what is good or what's bad and the why behind it, I think helps them to start to think through the problem from your perspective versus just their perspective, and really helps you get to a better overall conclusion.
I want to change lanes now completely and talk about Black Friday. So, for reference, we are filming this midway through October, and I will try and get this episode out as quickly as possible. What are you saying to brands about planning for Black Friday this year?
Yeah, so I think that there are a few things for Black Friday. This is probably I should actually know this. I've been through a lot of Black Fridays over the last 10 years or whatnot. So I've seen a lot. And what I would say is there are a few main things to be prepped on. Like one, you hopefully at this point you already have your offer and you already have a good idea of what you're doing. Honestly, a lot of brands probably have this like 6 to 8 months ago. But regardless, there are there's kind of a framework that I'm using for most of my brands that I work with right now. One of them is the lead up to Black Friday. It's all about lead generation. I think we all kind of know this in a certain realm. So doing a lot of like giveaways, optimizing your pop up, all that good stuff to try to get more emails and SMS leads into your system because those become super valuable. The second one is depending on the brand. And people have different strategies on this. I personally don't love running the sale the entire November. I would rather still keep the sale around that like Black Friday week, but have flash sales throughout November. So almost kind of like gamifying it in a way. So because if you run just one sale the entire time, you'll get a bump at first, and then you'll kind of like it'll fade, and you'll get little bumps here and there, but there's nothing really exciting. And I've seen this with brands before. So what I'd prefer to do is have these like flash sales throughout the month that are different than your Black Friday sale. So let's say for your Black Friday sale, you're doing like 30% off or something. Maybe one day you do up to 50% off a specific collection. Maybe one day you do $100 off if you spend, $300 or whatnot. So you do these other little offers. One day you do a GWP if you buy X or whatever. So they can be really great offers, but they are different than your Black Friday deal. And then you run a better than Black Friday deal that's very limited, and it's maybe a week before, and you only run it for like 10 hours or something. And so you have kind of like this like gamified thing so that people ideally come back multiple times, and you will see people come back multiple times. Then you run your Black Friday, start it on the Monday so that you can get your ads going, excuse me, and start to get some optimization and whatnot. Thursday, you'll see a big bump. Friday, ideally, you launch one more thing. So you launch like a new product or a new GWP or something special that just gives that day a little oomph. And then on Monday, you have something in your back pocket. And what I mean by that is I basically, for all of my retention strategies, we have a email or two that we're ready to launch on Monday, but we're going to make a game time decision whether or not we launch it. And it's typically like an additional discount or an additional GWP or addition, like something little that could get people across the finish line. And if we're not hitting our targets for that weekend, we can send it. But if we are, we can just hold it and not do anything. So I like to have all those things prepped. And then the other thing that I would tell all brands is you should have a really good idea of what your day by day performance should look like that week and especially that weekend. And then for Black Friday and Cyber Monday, at least you should have an hourly breakdown of what that looks like. And so you should be looking back at your past Black Friday, Cyber Mondays and knowing when you're going to see spikes in revenue based on just normal consumer behavior as well as emails, because then you can be tracking on an hourly basis to see if you're hitting or missing those targets, if you need to send an extra email, if you need to crank spend a little bit more, if you need to pull it back. Because for a lot of brands, that's going to be the most they've ever spent. So having some really good tracking against what that goals are or what those goals are is going to be vitally important.
So the two takeaways from me for that were kind of novelty and planning. Is that fair?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. We good.
Okay. Cool. As we start to kind of round off, then, so I know you've touched on this before. You want to be working with multi seven figure brands that aren't huge, but have found product market fit. Are there any other kind of criteria for businesses that you kind of work with, like any specific niches, geographies, or things like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would say we're anywhere between 5 to 50 million is what I would say. So we can definitely work with those bigger brands as well, but needs to be at least 5 million or more, just to have a little bit more proof of growth and whatnot. But other than that, I think the brands that we fit best into are the brands where they've had um, a lot of early success, and now they're trying to figure out, how do I build this team to get to the next level? And a lot of times it's a founder who's basically doing everything. They're the CFO, they're the CMO, they're the CEO, they're the product lead, they're all of the positions, and they want to hire but they don't know who to hire, and they don't want to take the risk of hiring somebody that doesn't work out. They're also not sure of like what is that next right position. that's kind of like the perfect place for us because we know how to work at startups. We know how to work with small teams. We know how to fit into the gaps of your team and mold into like what you have already working, and then we know how to basically run growth for you so that you can go ahead and focus on those other positions that are also extremely important. Yeah, like I said, we've got some proven growth, and we've got a product and a market that wants the product. Again, if you give me a product that's not selling, I can't do a whole lot about it. But if your biggest problem is just that you can't you can't you don't have enough time or people or resources to um, finalize the strategy and then execute against it, like that is great. Well, it's not great, but it's it's a perfect place for us to fit in because we know exactly how to basically add fire to that add fuel to that fire. Not always good with
Okay.
analogies.
All good. No, so my next question was in terms of, yeah, kind of the roadmap that you roll out. What's the timeline like on that? And yeah, what's the process for kind of getting new brands onboarded, diagnosing kind of gaps and yeah, kicking things into the next gear?
Yeah. So it starts with obviously during the sales process. I typically obviously I go through in depth, what we do and whatnot, make sure that there's a fit. I also do due diligence on our side to be able to make sure that hey, we're coming into a brand that I know that we can produce a lot of value for. One of the things that we do very differently than most agencies is we run a month to month model. So I have been on the client side where or the brand side where I don't like signing a contract for 3 to 6 months. It's not fun. And I am pretty darn confident that we can produce value very quickly, that I'm okay with doing a month to month. And it also, again, for that brand owner that's like, who do I hire? If I hire somebody full time, like it's a whole process. If that doesn't work out, like for us, we come in, you don't like it, it's cool. Like give us a 30-day notice and we're off. But we haven't lost a client yet. So I think we'll be all right for a little bit. Uh, so there's a little bit of due diligence on the front end just to make sure that like it fits well. Then once we get in, it really, again, it depends on the client a little bit and like what their prioritization is. In an ideal scenario, I like to have at least like around 3 weeks to be doing just due diligence or sorry, not due diligence, but like to get a good lay of the land. So what we do is we look at, okay, everything from, again, your P&Ls to your meta performance to your Google performance, all your media performance to your retention and your web. We do a deep dive analysis on everything. We're looking at your marketing calendar. We're learning your product. We're looking at your competitors. And then we also do team interviews. So we'll go through and we'll interview each individual team member and we'll understand, okay, hey, what do you do? What's your position? Where do you see the opportunities? Where do you see the gaps, et cetera? And then we basically come to the client with, okay, like here are our findings. Here are the main areas of opportunity that we see. And here's a new org chart with us in it. And so we basically design an org chart and we say, okay, we think this person is doing great right here. They seem to be crushing it. Let's keep them there. This person, they seem to have a position where they're not super clear on what they need to do. I actually think that we should have them focus on this, and then we'll take over this, and we'll actually literally manage team members. So we'll put ourselves in the lead of managing media buyers or retention strategists or whatnot. And then we get alignment with the client. We'll write success profiles for team members, goals, and then we've got our growth hub will be aligned with the targets that we align with the client, and then we're off to the races on executing. So that's kind of like the perfect scenario of what I like to do. There are some clients though that they're just like, hey, we need you to get in like immediately, and so we'll fast track that a little bit. But we always will do some of that process, especially like the team interviews and understanding obviously like the numbers and the strategy, and aligning on like a rough org chart is usually a really good first step.
Okay. And then in terms of kind of filling that old chart, I know you have, your, I forget the exact term, but I think it was like,
Growth operator.
yes, that was it. How are you
Mhm.
kind of finding, vetting, and then training those guys? Because, yeah, like you said, you're not losing clients. You're obviously doing something correct.
Yeah. So a lot of them are people that I have worked with in the past. So I've had a decent amount that are just from connections that I've had in the past, and then I reached out and I was like, "Hey, I'm going to start this thing. You in?" And they're like, "Yeah." So that's been great. And then a lot of them are people who have reached out to me just from LinkedIn and Twitter or X. So I do a decent amount of content, and I can't tell you the number of people who have reached out to me and been like, I really want to work at BA. I really want to work with you. I've had people offer to work for me for free, which I've said I will not accept. But it just, I think to me, it shows the hunger of individuals to really learn. And I love that because I was that same person where I was like, come on, just put me in, coach. Like, I know I can do it. Just give me an opportunity. So I think just by the content that I produce, I attract a lot of those people, which has been awesome. And I'm pretty I'm trying to be protective of my time, but I jump on calls with people who I've never met before because they've reached out to me and they just really want to work with me and get to know me. So I basically have a ClickUp board with a running list of everybody that I've talked to and their skills and whatnot. And then it just kind of comes on like a case by case basis, who's got the right skill set for X scenario. And then reaching out and going from there. But and then once somebody is onboarded, it's a lot of on the job training. I do have a good amount of video trainings that I have for my growth hub and whatnot. And then I do a Friday training with all of the BA team members as well. So, and I'll go through kind of similar to what Taylor did, where I'll go through and go through different clients or different trainings. I've also brought in people and paid them to do, more in-depth training on retention or web or whatnot. So, and then on top of that, I am working on, I won't disclose it fully because it's not announced, but I am working on a really exciting growth operator training boot camp style thing that will probably be launched in 2026 that I think will be a really good kind of breeding ground for new growth operators.
Sarah, thank you so much for coming on today. I have learned a ton. And yeah, I'm sure everyone that's listening have and will as well. For people that,
Yeah.
love what they hear and they want to hear more, I think you said LinkedIn and Twitter was the best place to find you. Is that correct?
Yep. LinkedIn, Twitter, or X, just Sarah Carusona, Carusona. You can also find me at bacommerce.com. It's ba-commerce.com. But yeah, love staying connected with people. And thank you so much, Jordan, for having me. It was a lot of fun.
All good. And just to remind people, you said this before, but I think it's brands that are 5 to 50 mil, any kind of category or niche, but yeah, any specific geographies as well.
No, I mean, we mostly work with US clients right now, but I've got US and non US team members. And so, yeah, really 5 to 50. We've got a decent amount of supplement brands, but obviously have also worked with apparel, CPG, kind of you name it. I would say the only thing we're not is like lead gen or like if you're a service based business, we're
Yeah.
probably not your go to, but you sell a product online, come talk to us.
Thank you for
So.
that.
Yeah, for sure, Jordan. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All good. Thanks, Sarah. Scaling an ecom brand is hard. That's why we're on a mission to share as much info as we can to help make it easy. From weekly interviews with the biggest names in the space to case studies, brand breakdowns, and tips and tricks, and much, much more. Subscribe so you don't miss out.